Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching my podcast. I'm Arup K. Chatterjee, and with me here is my friend, Dr. Rhodora Magan from the Philippines. And this show is going to be simultaneously hosted on my channel as well as our joint channel network, Bilateral View, which we started last year. Dr. Magan, how have you been? How was last week? And how's everything in the Philippines?
Excellent, Professor Chatterjee. Good evening to you. Last time we had the first installment of our three-part discussion on the Ramayan and Maranao, and of course Sabah dispute, of course, concerning Philippines and Malaysia. So I'm very excited for today.
Well, so am I. In our last conversation, you took great pains to describe, from what I gathered, at least these three very important things that the Ramayan, the Valmiki Ramayan particularly, got embedded into Filipino society thanks to the Maranao, and this kind of integration of this great epic must have started around the late 17th or early 18th century. The second most important point is that the Maranao were originally farmers. They were into green agriculture, but they had to migrate towards the Sulu Peninsula, in which we have another stock of ethnic Muslims, that is the Tausuks. And the Ramayan story, the epic, as well as the way the story became, this epic became a part of Maranao life, um, is also connected to Malaysia's to the Philippines' political destiny and its geopolitical place in the Malay Archipelago, which it shares with Malaysia and Indonesia. We know that the Ramayan is incredibly important in Southeast Asia in general, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines included. But there are certain very interesting nuances of how the Filipinos have adapted the Ramayan. So, for instance, you might recall my suggesting to you towards the end of our conversation the last time that the Philippines is perhaps, to my reckoning the only Southeast Asian society where the Ramayan is adapted not under the aegis of the dominant culture, that is Catholicism, but to the hands of Islam, as it were. But you quite rightly have cautioned me, or sort of added this other dimension of folk Islam or syncretic aspects of Islamic cultures. So today I have some you know pointed questions for you, Dr. Magan, and let me also remind our audience that we are basing our conversation on your very important paper, which you wrote last year, and I think it was published in early January this year, and that is the
Advanced
Maranao,
publication.
the Maranao of the Ramayan of the Maranao, published in Shima. Yes, it's a preprint. You've rightly reminded. So, uh, so we are basing our conversation on your very important paper. My first question to you in this second installment would be: is the way the Ramayana has been adapted by the Maranam, is it a very frequent part of their lives, or is it merely a nostalgic specimen, a cultural artifact which is also there, which lies somewhere in the backdrop and is maybe not very important to them, or are they indeed taking it very, very seriously in their everyday lives?
Okay, Professor Chatterjee, there are two sort of elements in the timology because the question is focused on the frequency of this type of adaptive framework. Essentially, the adaptation of the Ramayan in the past, okay, was very helpful to these Maranao people. And if we ask whether this adaptive state of the tale itself is still useful at present, I think we can draw a relationship between what happened in the past and its residue, okay? So that what we see now, this behavior among the Maranao and the general Mohammedan population in the Sulu archipelago, for instance, is definitely a like I said, a residual element, so that the characteristic we had seen in these piratical activities, which the Maranaos were very known for, or the entire the entire Sulu archipelago population was kind of labeled during the time, um, could still be in a way given some importance if we talk about how we are going to view them today. So I thought that this concerns the past of a certain community, which will always have to factor in their present lives. In the story that was adapted, okay, from the Hindus, like I said in the first installment, there was a deconstruction. The main character, the protagonism of Rama in Ramayan, was sort of lampooned in the Maharadia Lawana, owing to centralizing the character of Maharadia Lawana, who's equated to Ravan in the Valmiki Ramayan. So there was this deconstruction, as I said, and there was a purpose why it happened like that. So the Maranao, as we discussed in the first in the first installment, were people who had to flee from their original place because of the catastrophe. And so they had to find a new space for themselves. Take note, we're not talking about place here, to not literalize the whole transformation of themselves. So we sort of used space, because within the space they have found, I'm saying they have found because until now this is the kind of place that they are trying to inhabit, trying to find meaning with, and they're grappling with their identity, which was built before through the adaptive mechanism of embodying the characteristics of Maharaja Lawana in their own self. Okay, so this embodiment speaks a lot to how they want to survive in this new environment. They are okay. Just to say what piratical movement is not to vilify the whole case about these Maranao people, because in my study, it was a very great value that I saw to look into this kind of movement, which a lot of European books sort of vilified. Hence, they were called as the Eastern Sea Lords, because they really knew it. They really knew how to navigate the waters. The idea of calling them Sea Lords during their time was very prominent in the sense that they were kind of finding themselves in between Eastern giants, Western giants in the sea trade, and there you have them at the middle, trying to leverage their knowledge about the seas, about the monsoon winds, and about their stealth, and again, navigating their very important environment. So this radical movement, which, for instance, in the works of Joseph Conrad, was very much given premium because of how the binary sort of creates this Eastern Western type of skirmish all the time. This piratical assertion of them, of the Maranao people, as doing something that the whole world can frown upon, is something, again, that we are focusing on in trying to look at the clear profile of these Maranao people. So, Professor Chatterjee, the frequency of this type of activity, and when I say activity, it could mean that radical movement, and the other one is how they live by it, which is another activity, an extension of what happened before, is definitely something that resuscitates their identity up until now. Because up until now, that's why we title this Sabah dispute, because again, there is something that happened during the past, okay, involving these Maranao people and their new environment, which could, in a way, explain the recent skirmish between Malaysia and Philippines with respect to this territory in Malaysia now, which is North Borneo, or very famously known as Sabah.
If I have to ask you in a very pointed way, and I want an answer in one sentence, not more. It could be a long sentence though. Uh,
Yeah, it's very difficult to actually
what
have
would you
one-liners, right? Because it's so complex.
what would you
Like you
say?
said.
What would you say is the relationship of the Ramayana to the Sabah conflict? Because we are hearing these words. If you think from the point of view of the audience is hearing these words a lot. The Ramayan or the Maharaja Lawana and the Sabah dispute. Now, is there a link at all? Because clearly it seems from reading your paper that there is a link. But standing in the feet of our viewers who all may not necessarily have access to the privileged knowledge that you've gathered thanks to the time you spent in your research. So, what would you say is that link in a nutshell?
All right. So a lot of Filipinos, including myself, actually never even knew this type of link between Ramayan and Sabah.
So which means we need to underscore that your research is a very privileged space, and that is why I highlight that it's a very significant paper because not to my knowledge does it have any precedence. Yes, I know you have cited historians of the Philippines who have definitely done ethnographic surveys on the Maranao, but your case is extremely unique. So we need to underscore that.
Yes. So, Professor Chatterjee, it is a first. The very idea that a paper would contend that there's that reason which explains, okay, this kind of recalcitrant behavior, right? Recalcitrant behavior among these people in Sulu Archipelago who never wanted to integrate into the society. Because we're thinking here about integration, right? The very idea that in the first installment I said how my country is very fragmented, and also you mentioned in the question that there's this Muslim population and Christian population as well. So up until now, that opposition, okay, is very, very prevalent, and okay, because the Sabah claim, right, via the French court was already settled, everybody thought, okay, fine, that's a done deal. But very recently, okay, last year, there was this sort of resurrection, okay, of the very idea of the Sabah claim. And there was again this narrative that, the country has to push the boundaries and do something to that, and again excavate the very core of this problem. And what we're seeing is only the family, a very tiny family in Sulu Archipelago, the remnants of the past. We have, you can just say, the remains of the day in Ishiguro's way of saying it. So it's not the entire population wanting to get Sabah. Okay, it's just the family itself, backed up by the government. The kind of push, to my perspective, the way the study runs is very artificial. So it begs the question.
By family you mean the royal family.
By family, we mean the direct descendants. Okay, the ones who are in the direct line of the sultan. When it first became a sultanate, when it first became the emporium. So the government recognized these people, within the clan, and so we are kind of seeing the family as the one pushing the narrative, backed up by the government, but we're not seeing the entire Mohammedan population going for it. Hence, when I planned it out, I was thinking, what could be the reason? So we went to the behavioral patterns, and within the behavioral patterns, there's this, like I said, the recalcitrant behavior that gives us a picture that they never wanted to integrate with, again, the Christians. Again, that's the Spanish colonization telling us how brutal the Spaniards were in treating the Filipinos. Hence, there was this jihad in the Holy War. And it resonates with why, up until now, there could be no solution to, this whole problem about reclaiming Sabah, for instance, which is now Malaysia's, constituent. So we go back to the Ramayan influence in this whole dynamic within the Mohammedan population. And since I already talked about how the Ramayan became the inspiration of the Maranaos, through Ravan, for instance, who became the anti-hero in the Valmiki Ramayan, but in the Maharadia Lawana version, in the Philippine version, it was sort of the epitome of asceticism. The epitome of asceticism. And the epitome of self-denial, self-abnegation, right? compared to the protagonist, who is Rama, who is not at all seen to be depicting those characteristics. And that's the reason why in Maharadia Lawana, there's the centripetal force there of Maharadia Lawana, who, even though he did the crime, and we can say it's a crime, kidnapping is a crime, which in the Maranao culture is pagsagu, or literally, of course, to kidnap. Despite that quality of the main character in Maharaja Lawana, despite that event in the story, still there was the glorification of him, and that's the reason why he is, at the top of the pedestal. And so you ask why? Because in Maharaja Lawana, you are seeing a formidable force, to reckon with. A force, which I said in my study, a force that you can never ever lampoon. It's a very strong force, a force that can be epitomized in whatever circumstance, within the lives of these Maranao people who had to flee their homes and, had to find a new space in the coastal areas and make the sea as their own environment, their new
So
environment.
can we say, because I'm still not getting the answer I was looking for, can we say then in a nutshell that it is the Ramayan which, when adapted into, call it the Maharadia Lawana, if you will, that gives a central character to the, let's say, the holy crusade of the Maranao, not only in their daily life vis-a-vis nature, so they are changing their entire lifestyle and adapting to a different element of nature. From agriculture, they come to blue ecology, as well as adapting to the geopolitical ramifications or new realities of 21st century, the Sabah dispute, the Sulu, the Malay Archipelago situation, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines geopolitics. So here's the Ramayan giving a kind of an ideological repository of values for these for the Maranao people.
Yeah, like I said, I very clearly said it earlier that this became their inspiration to assert who they are, giving themselves the agency of surviving in this new space. And so we're talking about how being in this new space, they found, this clear ideology of who they are, their ontology has been cemented, okay? And through this adaptation, they're sort of telling themselves, okay, this is how we survive. And so looking at how these Mohammedan population is going to react to this renewed idea of, reclaiming Sabah, there's this, cold response, because we're seeing that these people living in Malaysia, for instance, these people living in Indonesia, the neighboring areas, are actually spaces where these Maranaos have been already inhabiting for years now. Because again, in being the master of the sea, they have these stations, right? Not just in Sulu Archipelago. See, the very idea of piratical movement mentioned in these books, as their main livelihood, okay, entails a lot of establishing of key points for them to survive. So it's not just against the Sulu Archipelago, it's Malaysia, Indonesia, and many neighboring countries. So that geopolitically, there has already been a stronghold for these people, so that there's no way for them, to conquer this area and be part of this area just to make sure that the Philippine sovereignty is resuscitated. Because, for these people, it doesn't really matter, because they find themselves not just in one location, they find themselves in many locations, in these neighboring islands, in these islands that for them are part of who they are. So exclusivizing the very identity of the Maranaos to this Sulu Archipelago, which is part of the Philippine jurisdiction, is not actually the case here. Because again, if you're truly inspired by how Maharaja Lawana is, giving his very ascetic nature, just to sacrifice, just to do these acts of acts of self-denial, again, it would mean not trying to resonate with the Philippine government, which is, very much Christian, and that's exactly the opposite of, Islam.
So the Ramayan becomes a kind of an old text, or the grand narrative, which then people adapt or deconstruct, if you will, in your words, to establish a sense of otherness, to establish a sense of a different identity from the Filipino government. That's what you're trying to say.
Professor Chatterjee, precisely. This otherness you're mentioning, okay, has been thoroughly articulated since the day they moved away from their green agriculture space, okay? So the very thought of trying to accommodate this other self, okay, is very much a template for not just the Maranao people, but for these inhabitants in these coastal areas within the assemblage. And when I say within the assemblage, it doesn't even talk about what boundaries, cartographic lines. No, there's no cartographizing their identity. I really mentioned it there. You know, if you try to force them to be part of a particular line, you know, cartographic line, there is going to be a mockery. There's going to be a lampooning of their very identity, which is very vast and not exclusive, but inclusive. Okay, so this is very interesting a philosophy for these people, you know, being inspired by this whole event of Maharadia Lawana, who tries to fight until the very end, you know, fighting for the just cause, because for him it's a just cause. Falling in love, you know, with somebody is a just cause. Well, despite the fact that she is married, Potre Laganding, Maharadia Lawana never actually looked into it as a sort of what? A violation, because for him, you know, he simply had to fall in love, but there was no mention, by the way, of him trying to violate the woman. And like in the Valmiki Ramayan, because there was this line there that sort of gave us the impression that Ravan was trying to touch, okay, was trying to touch Sita. That's why Rama was kind of speculating already about, you know, her chastity. But in Maharadia Lawana, there was nothing like that. So it was focused on this discipline, this very attitude of, you know, Maharadia Lawana, which resonates with who they are, the Maranaos, okay, how strong they are, how decisive they are in this new space, again, which is very much a pattern to these people living in these areas, you know, in the sea, in the coast, in these aquatic spaces.
Okay, my last question for today would be what do you see, or do you at all see, any kind of promise of Indo-Filipino dialogue? And this need not be state-to-state dialogue. It could very well be civil society to civil society dialogue on cultural grounds, because clearly this is a great space for soft power. But do you see the possibility emerging of leveraging the Ramayan legacy for a cross-cultural dialogue, or do you see the Ramayan in the Filipino landscape as being more of a, let's say, a tangential narrative, which is more important for political reasons than cultural reasons? I don't know if I'm coming across to you, if you are able to follow my question.
Mhm.
But the Ramayan in
What do
India
you say?
the Ramayan in India is extraordinarily important. People from all faiths relate to Ramayan. Yes, there are, you know, multiple other kinds of narratives that have also been built. History has witnessed very problematic incidents around that epic, but overall, the Ramayan is interspersed with every cultural, social, and political realities. But in Philippines, is it more of a political reality than a cultural reality? Alternately, the first option, do you think there's a better space for civil society to civil society dialogues?
Politically, culturally, okay, these things that the Ramayan has given to the country, okay, are very prevalent. And earlier you mentioned the word tangential. I would say it's not tangential, because since day one, you know, this Indic influence has already been there. And Ramayan, as you said, which is very big in India, has been transmitted to this society here in the Philippines. And so up until now, you know, yeah, you can say the ripples, not ramifications, but the ripples of this transmitted tradition, okay, are so clear and are so important if ever there's going to be a geopolitical dialogue within the Indo-Pacific region. So when we talk about how this creative amplification is creating a standard reception of many Southeast Asian countries, it means to say that, it's not tangential. All the more that you are seeing here a very huge, a very immense undertaking, in these countries to imbibe the virtue of discipline. Of course, I talked about this in the study, the value of impermanence, okay, which every culture, not just in Southeast Asia, is actually trying to adopt. And we are thinking of it as very axiomatic. So whatever happens in the long run, this will always be part of the discussion. The very ideas of, or the very ideals of sacrifice will always be there. Say, nation building, there will always be that value of, heroism all the time. And looking at the pros and cons and how the country can actually move beyond the present scenario. So, from the Malay Archipelago, very tiny grouping, to the Southeast Asian Dominion, to the Indo-Pacific, which is bigger, we think that there's this trajectory which is positive and reconciliatory. If that is the case, assuming that there are grudges now because of the disputes happening everywhere. So we're trying to say that this is a good platform, using stories to remind people of the very identity that they're they're trying to emulate since day one of their lives. And this emulation should never end. It has to continue because, again, culture is growing, it's breathing, it is a living entity. And that is the profound idea that we already drew from the study.
Well, thank you so much. That is a lot to digest, Dr. Magan. But as you know, as I know, but as our viewers don't know yet, this is not the end of your paper. We are still in the middle of it, and and there is a lot more to talk about because we have been discussing the story, Dr. Magan. We have been discussing the facts of the surface, as it were. But now we will have to go into the symbolic level, and we'll also have to contextualize it in deep academic thinking, which we are yet to do, but we will surely do in the third installment of our conversation. Well, what can I say? It's been a wonderful conversation, to say the least. This is not easy breezy stuff. This is this is incredibly complex. And I would just like to tell our Indian viewers, our viewers surely in the Philippines, and people from all across the world, since I am, I'm privy to Dr. Magan's paper in a special way. And in the next episode, we'll also bring in other thinkers, other people who facilitated her paper, particularly organizers of the journal Shima. So, given that privileged information, I must tell our viewers that what we have been able to represent is not the complete picture. We as academics, dear viewers, have great responsibilities on our shoulders. I'm sure there have been, tiny nuances that even we have missed. But when you read Dr. Rhodora Magan's paper, those nuances have been covered. The ground has been covered. There is only so much that we can represent in 30 minutes or less in these types of conversations. But we have the responsibility to reflect and to caution you that we are not able to deliver everything that we try to present on paper. And Dr. Magan, I'm sure, will testify to that. But Dr. Magan, thank you so much. That was so well done. Uh, you did a great
Thank
job
you,
in
Professor
summarizing.
Chatterjee. Thank you, Professor Chatterjee, for this opportunity. So I would say it hasn't been very easy to respond to those very multi-layered questions. Okay. Well, I understand why, because again, the study itself is very complex, and one-liners won't do. So I encourage our readers to access the file, and we put it in the description part of the first installment. It's quite long, and if it's political and cultural and ecopelagic, it's going to be really a beautiful ride. And please engage with us, in the comment sections, because this is very fascinating to talk about cultures, especially India, Philippines, Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific region, and of course the Malayan Archipelago.
Great. So thank you so much, Dr. Magan, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you, dear viewers, for tuning in. And until next time, see ya.